I got a new steering rack. And that's our job today, is to pop this thing in and out and see if there are any more leaks that might cause us to fail an inspection. That's charity car number 3, and it'll be up for sale, possibly going to auction in the spring, but it's up for sale now. Okay, 2008 Honda Ridgeline. We got to replace the steering rack, otherwise we're going to fail an inspection. It's leaking. So there's a few videos online about a Ridgeline steering rack replacement. They're not bad. They don't really tell you everything though. They don't tell you about all the shitty things that you're going to run across. So let me try to enlighten you. I won't touch on the details or show you too much because you can watch those other videos. Number 1, right here, you got a cotter pin and a castle nut, and then this steering rod has to come off. So what you're going to use to get those apart is this item. Pickle fork, whatever. Fork, it's going to go down in there, and you're going to have to hold it right up against this thing. And the easiest way to do this is turn these wheels. So this one would be turned to the left. So you turn the steering wheel all the way to the left to get this one done, and that'll help you drive this thing out. Because if you don't do that, you might not get quite enough separation going on here to pop that thing out. That's what you're doing. Step number 1, both sides. Use a pickle fork. Get these tie rods separated from the steering knuckle. Okay, step number 2, you're going to have to get these 2 bolts out. And the upper bolt is an awful lot harder to get at than this lower bolt. And that's because it's sort of up and around a frame component. They don't tell you that that's as hard to get out as it is, but I'll show you why. Alright, so we're at the back, and those 2 bolts, there's one right there. Fairly easy to get to. But the other one is way up there. And you see that plate right there that's protecting those lines? That's going to get in your way. Nobody tells you that. So what you wind up having to do is use one of these. It's a bit of a wobble extension. And it gives you enough leeway with a small, short socket to get in there and get some grip on it. But be careful, you don't want to strip that thing, whatever you do. But that's how you get that one out. Now you're going to have to get those 2 lines. You can see from the position, they're sort of tucked back up in there. That's not going to be the easiest thing to get. Those lines are way in the back there. Not these 2 front ones. I took those out anyways just to drain some fluid out. But it's those back ones back there. There again, not the easiest place to operate in. Pretty hard to get wrenches back in there. I'll let you know if I find anything unusual about getting that thing out of there. Okay, here we are on the passenger side. There's a bracket right here. Goes over top. Well, the bolt over on this side is relatively easy to access with a breaker. This one, not so much. And you may be able to see back in here. So there's the bolt. As you can see, they have nicely sunk it down in a bit of a raised lip there. That is nearly impossible to get a breaker bar on, socket wrench, a ratchet, and because of that lip, it's nearly impossible to get just an open-end wrench on there and get any good take on that bolt. So far, I haven't figured out how to get to it, short of dropping the subframe a little so I can get in there to work. There's basically no room there to get in there. So that's something that they sort of didn't quite tell you in the videos online. It's nearly impossible to get any sort of purchase on that bolt with a socket or even a right angle air ratchet. I couldn't get the air ratchet in there with the socket on it. It's basically sort of screwed me up at this point. I'll keep working on it. Oh yeah, as you can see, I got that a bungee around that hose up there because that hose is in the way of the socket. Another nice engineering component. There's a bolt up there, but again, nearly impossible to reach or get to or get any purchase on. We're literally looking at like 3 or 4 inches worth of room to work up here. Okay, so there's the bolt we had to take out that we were having trouble with. You can see it's part way out. It's getting stuck for some reason. And where I am is I'm in the back facing forward underneath. And you can see to get to that point I had to take off. There's an exhaust cover, or a cover over, I guess this, yeah, exhaust cover. And then there's 2 cat covers for this rear catalytic converter that had to be taken off. And that gave me enough room to get in there, but only with one of these items. So one of these ratcheting 14 mils. And I was able to get up there from this side and actually hook onto it and get it to move a bit. But now it's stuck, so I've put some penetrant on it and I'm going to work it back and forth and see if I can get it looser. I don't want to be busting another welded bolt like I did at the front there. So let's see if we can get this out without breaking anything. That, by the way, is also one of those things they won't tell you. Is it's hard to get to. It's almost impossible to get to on this particular 2008 Ridgeline, but you can reach it from here if you remove the exhaust heat shields from the lower cat and from the whole exhaust itself in the middle. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, there's one of the holes up there that holds it in. And to get to one of those, I basically had to use a small open-end wrench. That was the only way I could get up there to actually get those things out of there, because they've conveniently put one there, and then they put one way up over there as well, which is also blocked by this catalytic converter. So you can see how difficult it would be to get a wrench up in there. Now I do have an angular joint for the socket, so I was able to get up there and get a little bit of purchase on it, but not enough. It was just easier with a small open-end wrench, or like I said, one of these wrenches would be easier because at least you can sort of get up there and undo it. It's a 10 mil. Annoying design. Just complete knuckleheads. Alright, and there's the bracket out. Don't forget that you got to undo that little bolt there that's holding that hose on that was blocking everything. Now we got to go over the other side, see if we can get out those lines. Okay, here's another pile of BS from the online videos. You see where that clamp is up there, that wire clamp? Well, that's one of the plugs that goes in to the back of the steering rack. One of the hoses. There's a nut there. What they don't tell you in the videos is there is no damn room up there to get a wrench in. Oh, you can get a wrench on it, but it just slides off because there's just no damn room. So we're going to have to come up with something different. The other option is that we do what one person said and drop the subframe. Now we're working on that. Okay, here's another bit of left out info on the fix it yourself videos. There is no room in here. You can see, like, there is little to no room to work in here. You can see how I got this socket set up with a snipe. It's a small socket. It's the only way I could get that cracked. And I had to rotate the steering wheel to get access to it. Now it's impossible to crawl in there if you're like more than a normal size set of shoulders. You'll never get in here to do this. So yeah, it looks really easy on the videos, but it ain't. You have to undo that top and that bottom one. Top one's going to slide upward. Allow the component to slide upward. The bottom is the one that's hanging on. So you have to undo both of those. You loosen the top one. Undo both of them. Make sure you don't lose where your steering wheel is. And if you're planning to use a paint pen, know that it doesn't work on some of these components. Paint pens will not work. They just don't mark. Strange but true. Yeah, I also pulled the fuse for the restraint system, airbags. That's not going to stop them from going off because they have capacitors and other stuff. But at least this way I can tell someone if they say, hey, did you pull the fuse? I can say, yeah, I pulled the fuse. What the hell? I'm not going to stop it from going off, but, well, this is the issue that people talk about and why they have to lower the subframe. You can see where this thing is just going to hit right on that cross member there. And there is no way it's going to really get by, given its trajectory out of the upper drive area. That's because that bottom part of that thing is sort of pinched between two frame components. So we're going to go underneath and see if there's a bracket we can take off, but I'm guessing we'll be dropping the subframe. Now the subframe has probably about, I don't know, 8 bolts have to come out. Engine needs to be supported, maybe more like 12 bolts. Because the engine will need to be supported. You can see where that subframe attaches on to the side of the engine. There's a few bolts in there, some right there. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to get out. It does need to be supported, both the engine and the subframe. So there's one of the front components. So you can see we got a rather large bolt there. That does go into the frame, by the way. And those two up there. Same on the other side. That's one of the ones I broke over there. And there's a bunch in the back as well. And the whole engine has to be supported, as does this subframe piece. Because what you don't want to do is have that whole thing flop down on you. There's also a bolt right in the back, dead center in the other cross member. So you'll have to undo that one as well. Now this is the point where people have to make a decision if you're going to try to get it out without lowering the subframe. Like some people online show you, like, oh yeah, no sweat, you can just, you know, rotate it and pop it in and out. And others say, no, you got to lower the subframe. I'm at the break point right here. I've got everything undone. It does move, so it's loose. I still haven't got those hoses off the back because I can't get a wrench in there. But I'm thinking the path of least resistance is to undo the subframe. However, that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Okay, back of the subframe. One bolt. There's a second bolt right here. And the third bolt here. Remember, we're just going to lower the subframe. We're not going to drop it down. Just going to lower it enough to get the thing out. And we haven't supported it yet. I haven't supported the engine, but we'll get there. On that side, you get the same thing. You got 2 bolts right there, and then a third one back up over there. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this part. So one bolt right there. Hooks into the upper part. There's also a front engine mount, as you can see, hooked onto that subframe. I haven't figured out how to get that off yet. You have 4 bolts down here to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. That disconnects the subframe from the engine, so you better have support under there. We got a jack under there. And then at some point we're going to have to support the subframe, but right now bolts in the front are still snugged up. And then the other thing you got to do is you're going to have to loosen your suspension to get it to drop. Again, I'm not taking it out, I'm just loosening it. So we'll pop these 4 caps off, or these 3 caps off, and loosen the bolts on the inside there for the strut. Okay, well there's 4 engine mounts on the side here that were attached to the subframe, and that's how they go in. The long one right in there. Okay, another thing on the videos they won't tell you is absolutely everything is rust welded shut. That bolt there, which this bracket goes over top of that bolt, is rust welded on. There is no way to get that off, short of cutting it and replacing it. But it blocks that second bolt. So there's one bolt, but there's a second bolt on there. So in order to get that second bolt loose, you got to take that bracket off. But you might have to do what I did and just bend it out of the way. Another thing they don't tell you on the videos. So we got the subframe loose, but by no means dropping. So I'm going to crawl under there and start loosening the other side. There's a midpoint bolt I have to take out, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here. So there's a midpoint bolt back in here somewhere about there, and then I'll do the same thing I did over here on the other side. So the steering rack is loose, but still nowhere near enough to get it out of this thing. So we're going to have to lower the subframe some more. By the way, that center bolt up there somewhere, it's not certain it does anything. It holds a bracket in the back, but as usual, it's rusted and it's just spinning, and there's no way to get a wrench on top of it. So we've released the subframe, and the subframe is not coming down because of that bolt there and that bolt there. Now this bolt here we're going to work on. That bolt there is rusted, and the nut behind it up top you cannot get a wrench on, but we'll see what we can do. You can see we're trying to drive the steering rack out. It's sort of going, but it's got a long ways to go before it can rotate to get past that front frame. So we either have one of 2 options. We continue what we're doing, pounding it out, hope like heck it moves. And the second option is to drop the subframe some more. Well, we can't get any good leverage in here to get a wrench in here to get that thing off right there in the middle of the screen. But we have to disconnect that to get this thing out. It's actually fixed in at the back there. So facing towards the front of the truck, you can see I got a wrench up there. The wrench is hanging on to a 10 mil. And it's that rusted bracket there that holds the tube, the hard tube, to the subframe. So in order to get that other thing to slide forward, you got to get this tube release so that it can move forward to the point where you can get a wrench on it, as well as hang on to the thing. It's another thing they won't tell you about how difficult it is to get up there and get a wrench on that. You'll have to lower the subframe like I did a bit to get there with a wrench. Just things they don't tell you. Okay, so here's another little fun fact they won't tell you about. This line, which probably comes from the electronic line or something for this hose here, you see how it just yanked out of there, because this line here is attached to all these other lines with a mount bracket that wraps around the two and binds them together. Now you can pry it off after you've loosened the nut on it. Little bits and pieces of it lying all around here as it sort of fell apart. But at least that gives these lines a little bit of freedom to move on their own. This is going to have to go back in there somehow. I hope it just plugs in. We'll put a bunch of silicone tape around it. Just sort of just sitting there. Okay, so after loosening those lines on the other end, we're getting the bracket wrapping from around them, I was able to put all my weight on this thing and shank it down. So now it's going to clear enough that I think I can pound it from the other side and maybe get a wrench on that hose on the back side. Okay, it's off. I had to apply some heat, and look at how far that thing is forward, just to be able to get a 19 mil wrench around that thing. And even then, I had to apply heat. I had to make sure that this was secure because, of course, it's loose. So that means when you're torquing on it, it's not going to work. And that joint there, that is put on with some high level of unbelievable torque. Nearly impossible to get off. But it is possible if you're persistent. That's another damn thing they won't tell you in the videos. It's almost welded on, rust welded on or whatever. So a little bit of heat, some penetrant, and look how far that thing is forward. That's how far you got to get it forward in order to be able to put a wrench on there inside of this ridiculous, like, well, what, 6 inches here worth of working room? It's freaking ridiculous. So if you get it out this far, at least you got more working room. And that means you're going to have to push and pull and release a bunch of stuff back up in there if you can. Make sure it's not hooked up on anything. Not for the faint of heart, let me tell you. Here's another thing they won't tell you in the videos. This thing, which sits inside a sort of a bracket, it'll get hung up on this thing when you're trying to pull it through. So you're just going to have to reef on it until it decides to let go. There it is, out. Now, of course, I got to put the new one back in. Okay, here's some more shit they're not going to tell you about in the videos. That bolt, or that, sorry, I don't know what you call it, goes around the high pressure line, connects into the steering rack. That is simply going to be nearly impossible to get in there. It doesn't go in straight. When you do get it in straight, you have to fiddle with it to make sure you're not going to strip out the threads on that thing. I don't even know if that's possible. I mean, it's cinched down now, but there's another thing. When you go to cinch it, this whole thing is going to move. It's just going to move. It's just free floating in there. So when you go to cinch it down with your wrench, it's going to want to sort of lift up this way. So you got to figure out how you're going to jam something in there. In this case, I got an axe, and in this case I got an axe, and I got a 2x4 in there to give me enough leverage to block it in. It's mostly the axe handle at the back there that did all the work, keeping it steady so I could cinch down with the wrench on that thing. I am not convinced this is not going to leak, but we'll see how it goes. Might be a little easier if you had brand new lines. they were really high priced. So we'll see how this goes. I may be pulling this whole thing back out again, but that's another thing they'll tell you is that thing is almost impossible to get back on straight and almost impossible to thread down in such a way that you don't strip the threads. I also don't know if this is going to help at all or not, but I spun this thing around fully one side and then fully the other side, and then marked it so I knew where the halfway point was. Should get me pretty close to in line. I also, when I put these on, I put these end rods on, I measured back to the old one as best I could. It'll still need a full alignment, but that's sort of, I knew that would happen anyways, but this will get me pretty close enough so I can drive it to the alignment shop. Begin to sound like those other guys. Okay, also, when you're pushing the new steering rack through, make sure that this line goes underneath the steering rack, because it will, in my case, went above it. Then I had to go pull it back out again and push it around. Make sure when you're pushing it through, it's going on top of that thing. So here's the issue I'm facing right now. This will not go back in where it's supposed to go. You can see that little square valve stem there. It's sort of hanging us up. We basically cannot move any further towards the passenger side of the car for some reason. Something has got this completely hung up. And I don't know what it could be. I haven't figured it out yet. It's loose, as you can see, but it just will not go that way. And I can't really see what's holding me up. I know it might look like that hose on the top is holding me up, but it's not. It's almost like that little valve stem thing just needs to go onto that lip of metal. And there's no way to split those two because they're both frame components. I've lowered the frame down a little bit more, loosened this end up a bit, but still didn't help me get the thing out. Okay, so part of the issue we're having is there's a side port right there that's catching on this engine mount, this rear engine mount that's part of this frame. Now in order to get that to clear that, you can see under here, there's a bit of room there, so we can bring that down. And then that'll drop that down. It'll drop that port down and clear that engine mount. The problem, of course, is that we can't get this to come down because it's stuck on the other side. It won't allow any upward movement. So consequently, since there's no upward movement on the other side, we can't pivot this side down to clear that, and we can't get that other side in because it's hung up on the other port, which is stuck on that, just trying to clear that frame piece on the other side. So we're sort of stuck in a catch-22. We can't go forward because it's being blocked unless we can push it down. We can't push it down unless we can go forward, which is being blocked. Things they don't tell you. Well, as you can see, I pulled out the rack again. The rack was just not going in. That is just a fact of life, that this rack is just not going in where it should be going. Now, there's no obstructions, and it should be a straight shot through, but what's happening is it's getting pushed upward like this. So it's sort of getting pushed upward like this. This doesn't reside down on the bottom, and there's no way to get that to reside down on the bottom. And part of the issue is that these things stick up, and they're causing, there's the other one right there. You can see I did a bit of damage getting it back out again. It is so tight in there. There is absolutely no way what they say on the videos can be done. And yes, I've dropped the subframe down, actually lower than what they tell you to do. But in the two videos I watched, both of the trucks looked like they had lift kits on them. So it's a little bit of difference between this truck, which is an ordinary Ridgeline, and those trucks. No big deal. We're going to try to figure it out today. We're going to slide this back through. And to do so, I've made a minor modification to the frame, or a little portion of the frame. So the minor modification I made was with an angle grinder. And it's right here. And what I did was I cut out about a 1/2 inch by about a 1/4 inch of material in here. And that is what was hanging up on those sort of input fixtures on the side of the, or on the top rather, of the actual rack and pinion. And this is the issue we're having right here. So the question is, well, what can we do to help make it a little easier? So like I said, I angle grinded out a little piece in here. This part of the frame, it has no impact on this part of the frame. This part of the frame really doesn't support anything anyways, but the actual steering rack. And this will give us hopefully a little more clearance. And what I'm going to do, as you can see where it's going, it's just going right through there. I'm just going to try to slide it through easily. You can see there's nothing in the way, nothing blocking it. And we're going to do what they tell us to do on the videos, which is turn it this way, slide it in, and then turn it back. Let us see if that works. Now another thing I noticed about these hard lines is that they were squished down pretty close to the barrel of the actual steering rack, and as you can see, I've done the same thing here. I've just sort of squeezed them in so they're a little bit more snug. This thing was actually sitting up above those two. This joint right here, this input or connection right here, this was actually sticking a little bit above that. So you can see now it's sitting down more like this one here, sitting down nice and close. And you can see Honda must have bent this originally. So there you go. Well, as you can see, it did go in, but there's a problem. Now I have to try to connect up those two lines, and there is no room to work in here. I might either have to cut off a 19 mil wrench, like buy one and sacrifice it and grind off the end and give me a little stubby, or unless I can find a 19 mil stubby, because I don't know how I'm going to get in there to put that hose back on. But we'll give it a try. Whatever you do, do not accidentally undo this thing. Because to get this clamp back in there, this old style strange clamp, it's damn near impossible. You got to pry those two things out. It's not a very easy task. Don't take that thing out. You loosen it. It's not necessary, but you can. Whatever you do, don't take it out. Don't take that bolt out. It's a mess to get back in. Okay, so it did finally slide in. And take note of those big grommets up there. That's how I put them in. So the bottom sort of pointy crown-like bit goes downward. And this one up at the top, this is how I'm putting this one in. So it just goes right in there like that. It's got a little lip on the top, some holes on the top. I think those go on the upper side. Not 100% certain about that, but it's just a big rubber grommet anyways, so it doesn't have any impact on the driving or anything. And to get this thing in, because it'll get stuck. It'll get stuck down here. Get stuck way in on those joints back there. There's a little rubber grommet, you see. It'll sort of be hard to get it in there. But this is your tool of choice. 2x4 and a sledgehammer. Make sure that when you're doing this, you're pounding on these parts right here. Okay, and make sure when you're using that the 2x4 is going on this thing, not on anything else. Don't do it down here or anywhere else. Just don't wreck anything when you're using a sledgehammer to pound that in. Gently tap it in with a lot of force. Okay, don't forget this rubber grommet thing has to go in before you put this piece back on. When this piece goes in, you see it says front and back, forward and back, so that's going to go on top of there. You need that bracket at the back. So when you're convincing this to go back into place, gently, with a 2x4 and a sledgehammer, you're going to find two issues. The first is getting it lined up. And you're going to find an issue getting it lined up left to right and top to bottom. So what I did was I got it in as close as I could from the top and then used prise, 2x4, finally a screwdriver to get the holes to line up. Second issue you're going to find is right here is these little grommets that are in the inside. They're not going to go in very nice, so you're going to be contending with those. It's no big deal. They're not that critical. But just make sure you don't over tap it to the passenger side, because if you do that, you're in for a world of hurt trying to get it to go back the other way. So be very, very careful when you're putting it in to make sure it doesn't go too far like I've done here. See, I haven't gone too far. That's the first screw up I didn't make. Got a little smart that time. So one of the ways I got around this, getting this thing, the rack to fall down a little bit, come down this way a little bit, was by jamming a 2x4 up on top of the edge there, making sure you don't damage anything, and then using a jack to lift the subframe up, and that brought it back down. You can still see I got about just a smidgen left to go on the top bolt there. The bottom bolt is at least in the hole, so I just gotta tap it a little bit more to the passenger side. Well, with the rack down far enough, you can actually get into this bolt from this side with a regular 14mm socket. And that side too. But that's just because the subframe is lowered. So, subframe's low enough that you can get the socket in there. Unlike what I said at the start of this video where I said you can't get the socket in there. Well, it's because the subframe wasn't lowered to the ground. Well, damn near to the ground anyways. It's pretty low. There we go. So the problem I'm dealing with right now is the new rack is in, but these little rubber grommet pieces here have sort of stripped off and folded over the top of the hole part way. And it's making it difficult to get the bolt to go through. So I'm going to have to figure out, I got one bolt in, I got the lower bolt in, but the upper bolt is just not, it's just not going in. So this is folded over somehow and got lodged in here. So now there's no clean path through to the bolt on the other side. Now I don't know for certain that's what it is, but I'm pretty certain that's what it is. There's something blocking access to the hole. And there's no threading in here. I just got to get to the bolt on the other side. If you don't get it in right, you will strip the bolt. Now I got to go find a new one of these, or a used one. 2 replacements for the one that I stripped. Now I got to see if I can get that rack into correct position. So here's what caused us all the problem. Just going to take this flat edge and slide it down inside here. That's what's causing us the problem. Basically that back edge, see over there. Okay, so over there it's fine. There it's good. But once we get back to over here, start to see we got an issue. So So what's happening is it's going through, but it's hitting the rail at the back. So what does that mean? Well, that means this thing has to move this way. So we gotta pull it down a bit, push it back in order to get, actually it goes all the way down to the side here and starts catching at the top. So yeah, this whole thing needs to move this way. So we'll see how we can get around that. First thing I'm going to do is loosen up, make sure everything's good and loose, and then maybe tap it from the other side. See how that goes. Alright, there's what it looks like inside that hole. So back up there. So you can see that it's not lined up correctly. It's over to one side, and it's never going to fit in there if it's not lined up perfectly. That's the problem we're facing. Well, we screwed up. For whatever reason, one of those bolts welded onto the subframe has stripped. So that means we're going to have to pull the rack out again. Possibly see if we can get a tap and die set in there and fix the threads. Means I got to buy a new tap and die set because I can't find my old one. This time I'll buy a better one. And that's going to cost a couple $100. But such is life. So out comes this thing again. Good news is I'm probably going to be faster taking it out this time and putting it back in. Hopefully nothing's damaged. Okay, no damage done. A few scrapes and bruises, as you can see. No significant damage done. The worst was that little grommet right there. It doesn't hold fluid or anything. It just makes it for a little bit of a little bit easier to, well, sound deadening, I guess. That's the one that folded over when we were putting it in. It got caught up on the rack. This time I'll put some assembly lube or some lubricant on it so it goes in a lot easier. And well, that's it. We'll reset and get ready to put it in. But before we do that, got to figure out what to do about that strip nut on the subframe. That bolt's going in crooked, and that's what's stripping it out. That nut is welded onto the subframe there. It's a bit of a mess. So, step number one is straighten that out. Step number two, where that bolt goes in, that hole doesn't need to be on the right hand side of this thing. That hole doesn't need to be that small. So I'm going to get a bit, I'm going to make those holes bigger on the right hand side just a bit. Gives it a little bit of leeway to move up and down. This on the left hand side is going to be straightened somehow. Don't know how. And then, probably just by prying it or beating the hell out of it with a hammer. And then I'm going to try to get a tap and die set in there. If I can find one. It's going to be an odd size bolt, but I'll see what I can find next week. I need a good tap and die set anyways, an Irwin or something instead of those cheap ones, but mine seems to have wandered off. No surprise. Oh well. Okay, as you can see, I got a 10, 1.25 tap in there. Also made that opposing hole a little bit bigger so it's got a little more room. But it's still going to be a challenge to get this all lined up so we don't strip these bolts again. Let's see how we can do. Well, as you can see, the bolt goes through. Let's just hope it lines up. I don't know, we'll find out. Okay, I can't tell you how I got that in there because I don't really know. I basically put my hand back here, one hand, and then brought the other hand over top to spin this thing and just kept trying different positions until it finally went in. But it literally took about an hour and a half to do this. And all the time I was worried about stripping the threads, but it's in and it's tight. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is line this up dead perfect. We want to make sure we don't screw this up this time. We're going to start with the top one. I want to make sure that's the one that caused us most grief before, and we want to make sure it's lined up dead perfect. And then we'll use the strip bolt to get us sort of lined up really well, and then we'll use the good bolt to actually see if we can get it in there very carefully. Okay, they are in. I, for one, did not think those would go in. About a 50-50 chance. And while this time the top one went in a little easier after shifting the thing around, this bottom one was giving us some grief. So what I did was I took one of these things and shoved it in the just in the hole and inside the actual rack, whatever it is, the rack hole, and pushed and sort of pried it till I got it lined up. And then it was a Hail Mary. It was just shove it in and hope like hell you didn't strip the bolt again, and I did not strip the bolt again. Those two bolts are in. I got a bunch of crap up here to sort out. As you can see, it doesn't look very good. There's a bolt to go in up there as well. And then we can go start to work on the other side. I would strongly recommend you put this grommet thing in right here. That you put that in before you tighten those bolts on the far side. That way at least you're not wrestling with the steering rack trying to get that thing in. Okay, get this twisted up bracket lined around this thing and bolted into here. So you can see they're about 1 inch apart. This thing, for whatever reason, is glued onto this pipe. It's not coming off, it's not moving, you can't spin it or anything. It just seems like it's fused onto that pipe. And this thing, you can see we're out by about a 1/4 inch here, 1/2 inch. And that in itself is probably out about 1/4 inch or so. 1/4 inch to the actual bracket. There it is there. I don't know if you can see it there. Back up in here. So nothing lines up. Surprise, surprise. Another thing they will not tell you. Okay, loosened it up with a pick. Now we can move it. Let's see if we can get it in. So the issue we're having now is this freaking bolt. It's too goddamn short. Once you get the bracket in there and you're fighting with the lines to try to get it to go to where the welded in bolt is, or welded in nut is on the frame, subframe, this is too short. This is like freaking ridiculously short. We'll see if I got a longer one. Well, the bad news is I didn't find a bolt to test with. Good news is I'm pretty sure I found a longer bolt that matches. But I won't know until I can test it. Well, the good news is being a bit of a hoarder helps. That longer bolt made it a little easier. Of course, it's a smidgen long, but it looks like it just fit perfectly. Not a pain in the ass. Okay, we got that in. We got this one in. Pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated. Just had to jack up the subframe to get those bolts to start. This bolt here, that bolt there was a little difficult to get going, but I thought it was stripping, but I think I'm okay on that one. Once everything was jacked up, that bolt right in the center there, that went in. So that's into the engine mount, I think, a rear engine mount. So that's okay. So everything in the back end here is bolted up. I still got 4 mystery bolts. I got to figure out where they go. It says subframe, rear subframe bolts. So should be back here somewhere, but I don't know. Now I didn't think I would have to remove this thing. I didn't think that high pressure pipe would move enough to unplug this thing, but this wire, I thought there was enough room to go, but in fact it was crimped in against this this frame component, so it yanked everything right out. So I'll have to put that back in to the end there, and then that just clips on. And the way you get this off is by pushing down on this component right here, and then that releases the front end and allows it to slide off. So do that before you start pulling these lines. Well, there we go, over to the junkyard. Cost me a whole $1.25. And look at that. This thing's already been salvaged once before. No surprise. Well, somebody also had a boatload of cheap electrical tape on this thing. So I don't know if it's been replaced or Honda's just cheaping out on how they build cars. But that cheap electrical tape, and even wrapped around this casing, was just crumbling off. It's not the right electrical tape. I don't know what the hell it was. This is the configuration of how those wires go in there. So the blue one was the one that was on the top. Not sure if that makes much of a difference. I'm not an electrical guy. But blue wire goes in the upper end here. You know, where that thing got jammed in there. Black wire to the bottom. Okay, all the bolts that we loosened are now tightened, with the exception of one of these and the 2 on the other side. Somewhere down there. They are stripped, so I don't know what we're going to do about those yet. Okay, and the other thing, next thing on the list is these wires here. They got to be crimped into that new plug I got at the junkyard for cost me $1.25. So we got to crimp those in somehow. We don't have much room to work. Whether you're at the top or the bottom, you're only really given about 3 or 4 inches to work. So it's not a lot of space to work in here. But we'll get that done next. It looks like we did miss something. That thing goes in that bracket under the passenger side. So it goes around the high pressure line, the low pressure line, and it goes inside of that bracket. That's nearly impossible to get to. So now I got to put that thing in as well. I also had to tighten up on either side the suspension, the strut. So that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, we got 10 things left to do on this truck, starting with number 1. Get this item back in. Well, to get any kind of tool up in there, it's damn near impossible. But it can be done. So we got that little grommet back in. I'd recommend you do that before you raise the subframe up, if you can, because we couldn't do it, or I couldn't do it, because the line, the high pressure line, just wouldn't go inside that thing. It was just the way it was twisted, and it just would not go into that grommet. Job number 2 and 3, heat shields in. And that's item number 4, the new plug. It's gonna go right back in there. Okay, before you put the steering rack back in, you might want to sort out this little white clip way back over here. It plugs into the side of the frame. It's nearly damn impossible to get in or out once you've got everything back in. I was able to do it with a set of wire snips, but That's how I was able to get the old one out and plug the new one in. But make sure you do that ahead of time. End link's in, cotter's in, everything's tightened up and snugged. Okay, 5 more things to do on this car, so let's start with the reattaching the steering wheel inside the truck. Okay, so there it is in, but you can see I made a screw up that I'm probably not going to fix, and that's that grommet at the bottom. It's supposed to come up, there's a little lip on it, and it's supposed to come up and be inside of that metal area there. Basically it just keeps water and stuff out. I don't know how much of an issue that's going to be. It's jammed in there, but if you're doing this right, when you're lifting the subframe up, you should be in here trying to get that little lip thing to line up a little better, and I have it here. I'll try to get it from the underside, but I really doubt that there's going to be any hope of getting that thing in. Make sure you understand that that bottom bolt, there's a bit of a furrow between 2 sets of teeth on that thing. And you got to get that bolt so it goes right inside that furrow. Otherwise it won't reach the bolt on the other side. So just make sure that the bolt at the bottom is inside the furrow on the rod that comes from the steering rack. Hopefully this works. So the tires are on, interior's back together, and the fluid's topped up. But as I turn this on, what I'm going to be doing is turning it on, and then I'm going to be turning the wheels back and forth, jacking the truck back up again, turning the wheels back and forth until there's no more noise or the fluid level's correct and everything seems to be working fine. And that's the last check before we check for leaks. So all that's left now is basically just to jack it up and start turning the wheels back and forth, crossing our fingers and hoping we did it right. Okay, fluid is in. Everything seems to be working right. Definitely needs an alignment. But I have to lift this back up again because I don't think I tightened down the tie rods well enough. There's a little bit of play in the wheel. So I'm going to jack it back up again and take a look at it. And then the other thing is, what am I going to do about these bolts under here that are stripped? So as you can see, this is not a thing that should be happening. And what this is caused by is that the tie rod end nut, the castle nut, is not tightened down tight enough. That's what I'm thinking. Well, as you can see, didn't tighten it down enough. Okay, I still haven't figured out what's going on with these castle nuts. You can see I've loosened them back out again. When I torque that down, I mean right now the whole thing is loose. This hole is loose. And when I tighten that to the spec, which is 40 foot-pounds, the castle, the turrets of the castle nut go far beyond the cotter pin hole, like far beyond it. So I'm not certain what to do here that'll allow me to pass inspection. I'm not certain whether what I need to do. So this is what I've found. This is the original tie rod end, outer tie rod. It had these bolts on it. They're just plain bolts. They look a little funny. Almost look like they'd be vinyl, like they'd have vinyl in there, but I don't really see it. That's what was on the original. Here's the other one. That's what was on this outer tie rod. This tie rod is the one that I had ordered from Rock Auto. The issue we're having is when you crank it down to 40 foot-pounds, the castle goes far below the cotter hole. I don't think that's right. When I went online to Rock Auto and looked again, I'd found that there were two versions of these. One with the vinyl threaded nut and one with the castle nut. I'm pretty certain the original ones that were in here, that these were changed. And the original ones that were in here were the vinyl nuts. And what I'm looking at here is possibly when they got this, which is obviously a castle threaded nut, or threaded for castle nut. They went back in, they had the same issue, so they went back in, took the bolts off the old one, or grabbed some other bolts and used those. Because on Rock Auto, you can, well, it looks like you can order these outer tie rod ends with a vinyl threaded nut, which I think is the original spec for the Ridgeline. And so that avoids this issue here because you can just crank the vinyl threaded nut down as far as you want. That's what I think these guys were dealing with, whoever did this. So I went and ordered those vinyl threaded nuts, the tie rod end with the vinyl threaded nut, and this is what I got from Rock Auto. Another castle nut, even though the picture clearly showed a nut like this with a vinyl threading on it. A lock nut, so to speak. So here again, screwed over by Rock Auto. I got the wrong thing shipped. But the good news is this is quite a bit lower than the existing one. So you see it's lower. So I can get it so that it just barely touches. I can sort of, like the level of where it gets to is something along this lines here. About like so. Maybe like that. Maybe a little more. Maybe about like that. It's not great. It's not good. At least you can get a cotter pin and sort of wrap it around the castle to some degree. I don't know what the hell they're doing over there, but they did not send the right one. I was definitely ordered one with a vinyl lock nut on it. That's an issue you're going to have. In the other videos, they ain't going to tell you about that. Okay, we test drove the truck. We've crawled under here to look for leaks. There's nothing leaking. Everything's solid. We're good. Tires are solid. There's no issue. Still need alignment. But the steering rack is in. We still have this issue. These two busted bolts in the front and one on the other side. But that's a little bit bigger project. So that's for another video maybe. Maybe not. We're going to have to remove this front piece right here so we can get access back into here. Cut those things off probably will be the first step. And then decide where we go from there. We'll just replace them somehow. Probably by just punching right through. I think those screwed right into the subframe. And this little bumper subframe thing. And this bumper subframe thing is it's sandwiched, so it's got two layers, so we can't actually get in here to see what's going on, but we're pretty certain that whatever's there, whether it's I suspect it's a welded in bolt or something, has been rusted and busted off. So we'll cut these bolts off. We can get through this side, we can get through to the other side, so we can put two new bolts in and just put some nuts back up in here, going straight through the two layers of this thing. That might be the best bet, the easiest route. But we'll see. It starts with cutting these things off, which is going to be a bit of a pain in the ass. So yeah, be careful of these, or you'll bite off a whole world of hurt, which involves taking the bumper off and taking the bumper support off and all the other crap that goes with it. And I don't even know if this is attached to the frame, like welded on or not. I just don't know. I know this supports the radiator, so we'll have to see. But that's that's that. But for the steering rack, it's in, it's working, it's not leaking. I can't really describe the sensation of driving because I haven't driven this truck enough to know whether it's good or bad. It just feels really, I wouldn't call it sloppy, just really soft steering. You can steer with your pinky finger. It's that soft. I don't know whether it's like I'm used to stiffer steering, so I don't know. We'll see. For now, it's okay. That's the end of the video.